Okay. Yeah, so let's just wait a couple of minutes.
Nice.
Yeah.
We're live?
Yes, we are live.
Excellent.
Yeah, so in the meantime, I did have a question for you. So you said that you work in management now. Like, does that mean you work with like the workflow of a project more, or like what do you mean by that?
Yeah, so I just transitioned to engineering management. Like literally this is my second week. My main responsibilities are like making sure, my reports, people that I manage are doing well, they're happy, they're motivated. Um, Definitely I'm coding a little less now. And I think I will be coding less moving forward, but I hope to never stop coding. So, I think it'll always be me trying to find a balance between the two. But yeah, right now, for instance, it's like a lot of planning for, we're working on a new project. So planning it out, writing a tech spec, talking to people that are either going to work on it or use it, or it's related to their projects. So it's a lot of meetings as well. Like I don't want to don't want to over coast over the fact that there's a lot of meetings. A bit of a shock, my first week when all of a sudden I got like 10, 15 invites just landed on my calendar. But it's a part of the role to like know what's going on across the company and things that are related to you or things that are upcoming. So you really have to build strong relationships with other people at the company. Or when I was just a coder, like I would go to some meetings, of course, but a lot of times my manager would be the one who would be like, okay, this is coming down the pipeline, like maybe join this meeting regularly to kind of stay on top of it. And then meeting would be done and I'd just go and focus on code. So it wasn't a lot of reaching out to people. It was more just kind of being in my own world in that sense.
Totally. Yes, yeah, like that's definitely true. I feel like as a coder, it's very easy to like just kind of stay in your own world, especially since projects are very exciting. So
Yeah.
it's really interesting.
Yeah. But, I've been coding for a long time. So it's an interesting opportunity for me, I think, to grow and, try something new. Yeah. So I'm kind of excited to see, how I handle these new challenges. With coding, I always know what to do now. I've been doing it for so long. Like, what problem can't be solved with enough, thinking and stack Googling and stack overflowing or whatever. But,
Yeah, for sure. And so you also work on like you work like with like the Bolt framework and everything like that, right?
yeah. Primarily Bolt for JS, which is what we're using. So it's perfect. Yeah. Since I joined Slack, that's been like my main focus with some of the JavaScript, TypeScript libraries that we offer. So it's getting familiar with them and then eventually getting to the point where I'm not just fixing bugs, but I'm also adding like massive new features to the library.
Wow, that is awesome.
Yeah,
Thank you very much.
yeah, and it's cool that everyone here is learning it, and of course, I'd love any feedback. I've heard in the past some of the earlier sessions there were definitely some issues with especially around ngrok and setting up, understanding how things work in this ecosystem, but hopefully once you're over some of those humps, things get a lot smoother for you.
Yeah, for sure. Honestly, I think I actually really like this approach to learning because like as you said, you have like a lot of like other tools that you're using. Like I never would have had another occasion to use ngrok, at least for like a while. So it was nice, even though like I'm definitely not an expert with it, that I got to learn that in the process.
Yeah, definitely. That's why I really like this format too. It's just like learning other people's workflows and their tools, and it's a great way to level up for sure. Yeah, even for me, I didn't use ngrok until I joined Slack. So it was, and I went through probably some similar challenges to what everyone else here faced when they went through it the first time. So I empathize with you.
Okay, so it has been almost 5 minutes. So I think we're ready to get started.
Nice.
Thank you, everybody who has joined. We're going to get started with week 4 of building Slack apps. Okay, so let's do short introductions. I'm Fifi, which you probably already know, and I am the instructor for this camp. And this is Steve, who is a wonderful mentor. Steve, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm the engineering manager of the developer relations tools team. In previous weeks, you've seen Mike and Alyssa present. So I am now their manager, and Ankur has moved on to a different company, but we still love him deeply. And so I've taken over that role. But historically, I've been an engineer, and I've been working at Slack for getting close to a year and a half. Definitely very proficient in JavaScript and TypeScript. But outside of Slack, I've been working in the tech industry for over 10 years now. Mainly working on open source libraries, mainly working with JavaScript, Node.js. That doesn't mean I can't code in other languages either. Just don't test me today. But yeah. And I've lived in the Bay. I lived in San Francisco for 7.5 years when I worked at Adobe previously. But now I live out in Vancouver, where I'm originally from, up in Canada.
Awesome. Okay, so now, let me go back. So now I'll give you guys a quick overview of what we're going to learn today. The concepts and the things that we're going to learn are webhooks, Express, and Axios. So 2 of those are like frameworks or tools that integrate with webhooks, which we will talk about in the next slide. But basically what we're going to do is we're going to integrate apps that use webhook data. Okay, so what exactly is a webhook? A webhook can also be called I think a web callback or a push API. So it's basically a way for you to get real-time data from another application to the application that you're building. And it's really great because you get to, you basically just get to set it up once, and then you will always get that information from that separate application as long as you're listening for it.
Express. So Express is a web framework built in Node.js. It's actually been around for a very long time, probably since the beginning of Node.js. So like 2012, around there probably. For those of you who aren't familiar with the web framework, generally when you build websites or web apps, you have a backend. So that's usually a web framework. That's where you would use Express in this scenario. And as you visit, different URLs of your web app, those requests would go to your backend, your Express app, and then Express would then determine, what to send back to load in their browsers or any other logic, like save this in the database or anything like that. It all goes through Express. It's been around for a long time, like I mentioned. It's probably still the most used web framework in the Node ecosystem, but there are other popular alternatives as well. Being such a long-lived project, a lot of newer ones come around that maybe introduce some new hotness to the ecosystem. But Express, because it's been around so long and it's been used by so many developers, it's honestly, in my opinion, a really great framework if you're getting started as well, because of the extensive documentation, and you can really get a lot of help on sites like Stack Overflow. So definitely, it's something I think it's worth learning if you're getting into web development, and especially the Node ecosystem.
Okay. So the last piece of new technology that we're going to be using is called Axios. So Axios is basically a promise-based HTTP client for Node.js and your browser. So this means that you can basically get information from a certain endpoint and then use that data to your advantage in an application.
Yeah, we'll have a demo today that uses Axios, and of course we're going to be using Express as well, which is what Bolt uses under the hood, depending on the receiver you choose, which I'll explain in a bit.
Okay, so I know that this was definitely a lot of conceptual stuff. It's totally okay if that went over your head. because the best way to learn all this stuff is to watch us program it and to program it yourself with the homework. So it's time to get to coding.
Okay, so I guess I'm going to share my screen here.
Yep.
And I think this one. Sorry, give me 1 second. I assume you can see yourselves in StreamYard now. I should probably
Let me add you to the stream. Yeah.
Move this away. Okay, everyone can see my screen. We're good? Mm-hmm. Awesome. Okay, so I know this is, since this is week 4, I imagine some of you have already been going through the basics of building a Bolt.js app. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that because it's previous knowledge. But if you do have questions, feel free to leave a comment in the chat. Leave a comment in the chat here. And if you can just let me know if something comes in. I don't mind stopping and answering any questions as we move forward here. So step 1, of course, is you want to go to api.slack.com/apps and build an application. I've already gone ahead and done this, but just to show you what it would be, I imagine you've done this before. You go here, you create a new app, give it a name, and select the development workspace where you want to install it. If you don't, of course, I imagine most of you are using free workspaces right now to do your testing. So I've already created a Bigcamp week 4 application here. And we might as well, while we're here, we might as well just install it into Slack. I know we don't have any code for it yet, but we might as well do that initial install. To do that, we would generally go to OAuth and permissions. And there's usually an install button here. But to do so, if on your first time, you have to make sure you add a scope. So if you go under bot scopes, one scope we're going to be using today is chat write. So you can see I've already added it. And once you add this scope, install it to your workspace. I'm going to go ahead and click reinstall. And you get sent to this permission screen here. Click allow, and that should install the application to your Slack workspace. And it will also give you a bot token here, which we're going to need. Okay, so let's actually move into VS Code here. So I've created an app.js. It's blank. There's a lot we need to do to get started. The first thing is we might as well download the Bolt.js library from npm. So if you don't have package.json, you haven't npm initted yet, I would run npm init to start. This will create, a basic package.json. Sorry if you can hear a baby crying in the back. I don't know if that's coming through or not.
No worries.
Okay, I just accepted all the defaults. Of course, when you're setting up npm init, you probably want to give it the proper name, version, maybe select the license while you're at it. But for our example, I didn't need to do that. You can see my basic package.json is set up right here. Now I can install Bolt. So npm install @slack Bolt. That's the package name. Hopefully this is all familiar so far. Oh.
Yeah, sorry.
Font a little larger.
Right. Thanks, Rebecca.
How's that? Is that?
I can read that, yeah.
Yeah, I on my screen it looks very big, but I know I have a very large monitor, so I know that doesn't always translate well over screen share. Okay, so I've added Bolt. This should all be pretty familiar to you, I take it, like what I've done so far. And then, just setting up, excuse me, 1 second. Now we can just go ahead and do our usual setup that we're probably familiar with. So I'm going to go ahead and pull app from the @slack Bolt package. Okay, that looks good. Oh, I probably don't want to cap this. There we go.
And just make sure, do you already have .env installed?
Say that one more time.
Do you already have .env installed?
.env installed. No, I do not. So I will do that as well. Was that a question in the chat or?
Oh no, that was just a question because I usually do it all at once, so I was making sure.
Yeah. We can jump into there too. I just wanted to get the initial setup going here. I'll jump into that right in. Give me 2 minutes. So we pull out app from the Slack Bolt.js package, and then we're just gonna create our app variable here, new app. And if you're familiar with this, generally we need a token, and we would want to save this in our environment variables. So process.env.slack bot token is usually the standard name. So this is just like the most basic app I'm just setting up right now. It doesn't do anything at this moment. And then we need to do actually calling app.start, an anonymous function. Hopefully this all looks familiar so far. I haven't done anything new. This is all just building on what you should know. But if not, that's okay. I'm once again open to, usually we do this. You can define the port in your environment variables as well. Or you can use the default, which in our case will be 3000. And then we can usually do like a console.log, Bolt app has started. Okay, so you mentioned .env. So that is actually a great package to actually manage your environment variables. So right here, I have an environment variable I need called Slack bot token, and I have another environment variable called port, which is optional. .env allows you to actually create a file in your application here called .env. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that. And sorry, 1 second. Just want to open my .env up here. And before we do that, we need to actually npm install the .env package. So npm install .env. Let me just double check the name. Yeah, I think that's right. So this should save it to our package JSON. Great. You should see under dependencies, we have Bolt, and now we have .env. And then we also need to initialize .env, so it actually pulls the files. It actually reads this .env file that we just added. So to do that, we add another const. We pull out this time config from our require .env. And then we just need to call config, which will look in your working directory, find the .env file, and load any values we have stored there. Okay, so theoretically this should work right when we provide a bot token. Let's do that and just give it a shot, make sure it's building. So let's add Slack bot token. And I believe that's the format. Yeah, it's going to be a string. So we got to go back to our browser. And now we go into our app and go under basic, OAuth and permissions. I was already there. Oops. And copy this. Go back to our code. Paste it. Let's save that. Actually, and there's one other piece we're missing, which, let's just run it and it should tell us right away that we're missing it, I think. Oops, that was not expected. 1 second. I have an older version of Node. NVM use v12. I use this library called NVM to manage Node versions, so I can jump between them. Let's try again. Should give us an error. Perfect. So anyone know what we're missing? We need to also include the signing secret. So that's another value we can get from our basic information here in app config. You can see signing secret right here. Show it, copy it, go back to our code, Let's add that while we're here, back in our .env file. Okay, I think we're good. So let's just confirm, we got the basics working here. Oh, what did I not say? What happened? What am I missing? Oh, of course, I haven't added it. I think I have to add it here. Actually, I'll demo the next part first, and I'll add it right there. So generally with Bolt, there's this concept of receivers. So since Bolt 3, we changed the default receiver to one that's HTTP based. So your Bolt app itself is a server. It has routes. It listens for requests coming into that route, usually from the Slack backend. An event happens, that'll be sent to your Slack app. Your app has to receive that event, and then usually Bolt will send it to a listener if you have the appropriate listener defined. For our example today, because in our first demo, we're actually going to be creating a custom route. So we're going to create, by default, Bolt.js creates the Slack/events route. That's what we use for event subscriptions. That's what we use for interactive payloads and shortcuts for those subscriptions. But in our example, we're going to create a brand new one that is completely unrelated to the Slack world. So to do that, we need to use a different receiver. So before Bolt 3, we had our default receiver was an Express receiver. So I'm going to go ahead and import that right here. And what this does is essentially under the hood, Bolt.js is using Express. Express is a dependency of Bolt.js. It creates the routes using Express. That's kind of the gist of what's going on here. But so when we import this receiver, we actually have to define a receiver and pass that into app. There are a few different receivers Bolt comes with. The built-in HTTP one, Express receiver. We also introduced recently a socket mode receiver, which maybe I can touch on later, depending on time and if people have interests. And we also have very recently introduced an AWS receiver, which is for Lambda, for serverless, for the serverless context. I don't actually think that one has shipped yet, but it just merged into the main branch, so it should be shipping soon. So here we got to define our receiver. So const receiver equals new Express receiver, and what we need to pass in here is our signing secret. I believe it's in, yeah. And here we can refer back to the environment variable we saved our signing secret into.
And while you're typing that in, you might, like if you search up Express, you'll probably find that like it's defined as a middleware. Is that like, is it called a middleware because it like goes in between Slack and like your response to an endpoint, or why is it called that?
Personally, I wouldn't call Express a middleware, but Express has the concept of middleware. So what that means is when you have say an Express listener for a specific route, a route gets hit for your web server. Let's say, my, home / your website / about, let's say someone navigates to the about page. First, what it'll do is go into the listener code you've defined in Express for that route, whatever matches. So it'll go into there. And then from there, you can have middleware that runs as you're processing. And Bolt uses this concept of middleware. We've actually baked the concept into Bolt.js the same way that Express does it. Bolt was definitely inspired by Express when it was being created. So even now that we're not using Express as our default receiver, we still have this concept of middleware where you can an example is, say you create a listener for messages coming in. So in previous weeks, you might have used like an app.message listener or app.event, but app.message is the one I'm referring to here. And you would have a function that runs, but you could provide middleware that maybe filters out messages. Maybe it's only responding to a certain type of message or only from a certain person. So all messages might go to your listener, but the middleware you could use to essentially on every instance of messages coming in, you can use it as a filter. Does that add a little bit of clarity?
Yeah, for sure. That definitely does.
Okay, so I've defined my receiver here. I provided my signing secret. Generally, if I didn't provide a signing secret here, I would need to provide it to app, and then it would be used automatically in my default receiver. But since we're not using the default receivers, there's no point to go down that route. And here I'm going to pass in receiver. That should be good. Let's run it. Oh. Not exactly what I was expecting to happen. That's okay. What am I missing? Any obvious errors? Sorry, let me just double check here. Oh, I see what I'm doing. I forgot to add a little function call. So this will make it so this function runs immediately by adding 2 brackets here at the end. There you go. Both apps have started. That's exactly what we expected at this stage. Okay, so now that we're set up, and hopefully this is a point that everyone's comfortable with, like from previous weeks, now we'll actually work on our demo for today. And the first demo we want to do is showing off webhooks and custom routes in Bolt.js. So what we've decided to demo today is we're going to go to GitHub, and you can go to any repo that you have. If you haven't created a repo, definitely do that. And under settings, GitHub has this section called webhooks. So this is where you can actually tell GitHub, like, GitHub offers certain events that they offer webhooks for, and on those events, what it will do is send a payload to whatever URL you provide, and from there you get the data into your system, and you could do whatever. And in our example today, we're going to listen for stars. So when a repo gets starred, we want to get that event, or when the repo gets unstarred, we want to get that event. And what we want to do is just do a simple message into our Slack workspace, letting whoever's in the channel know, hey, this project has been starred. This is how many stars it has. So I already have a webhook, but I'm going to delete it and start it from fresh. That's how we go.
Could you please zoom in a little bit, please?
Oh, okay. Yes. Sorry, I just gotta scanning my finger. Scan. Okay, I think we're good here. Okay, zoom in. How's that look?
Just a little bit more.
A little more?
Yep.
Good. Okay. Under this webhook page, go ahead and click Add Webhook. So here we need a URL, and obviously we don't have a URL. We need to set that up. So there's this section here for content type. So that's the format that the webhook is going to be sent to you. For our example, we want to set that to JSON. We just like working with JSON better. Secret, if you want to essentially make it a little harder to get access to the payload, but we're going to not worry about the secret at all. And then down here is where you would select what event to send. So right now, by default, it's set to push every event. So that would be like, oh, someone just committed something. Someone created an issue. There's so many different events. So obviously, we don't want that in our example today. So we're going to go ahead and click, let me select individual events. And here you can see a giant list of the events that are available. It's quite large. So I'm going to turn off pushes because we don't want that. And for today's example, we want stars. So good. Now I can't actually add the payload, add the webhook until I provide a URL. So let's go back to our code and create a custom URL. First, let's just jump right in. So this receiver object that we created, it actually exposes a property called router, and that's what we use to create custom routes. So in our example, receiver.router.post, because we care about the body that's coming in. And so this is the point where we create the URL. So this is the endpoint we want to provide to GitHub, where they're going to send the payload when a star gets clicked or unclicked. So in our example, I'm just going to call it GitHub stars. So when they go to my server /GitHub stars, if it matches this, it's going to come into this function I'm about to define, this callback. And 2 arguments are usually a part of that payload. There's a rec and a res. And now, so if this endpoint is hit in our server, it's going to call this callback, which is going to go into this function. Maybe let's just start with something simple like console.log hit my route for GitHub stars. Okay, so I need to restart my app. Cannot read property apply. Let me just double check. Oh, maybe it's because we're doing it res. Maybe because we need the send status. That's probably important. I think, let me double check. I'm not sure.
That's right.
We do need that, but I'm wondering what this error is. Always fun when this happens. Little live debugging. Right now I'm looking at my reference app, which I'm cheating, I know, to see what I'm missing. It's probably something, oh, I see what it is. No, that's not it. I was thinking I was just missing a bracket, but that's not the problem. This code looks good, so maybe it's something else we're missing. I don't think we need to provide middleware at this moment, but maybe it's good to jump to that step. Okay, so just off the top of my head, maybe one thing that's going on is Bolt.js has a specific version of Express it's using. Maybe we're having problems there. So in general, like if we're going to use Express as a top-level dependency, and which we are, we're planning on import and requiring it. It's, in my opinion, it's always good to not rely on a dependency of a dependency. So right now we're relying on Express through Bolt. It's good to actually npm install Express as a top-level dependency. So let's go ahead and do that. That should do it. Okay, you can see in our dependencies we have Express, the most recent version. Going back to our app.js. Now we can go ahead and require Express. But we're obviously not using it yet. And I do have plans to use it. Primarily, with Express, we covered this topic of middleware. So one of the nice parts, generally when you work with like a standard HTTP server, I mentioned you have rec and res as 2 parameters that come with when your endpoint is hit. Well, Express has some handy built-in functions that allow you to actually have this rec in a more parsed, readable format. So we can actually provide middleware that will parse the rec and give us a property called rec.body that is already like JSON formatted. It pulls the relevant data from this rec object. This rec object, if you ever console log it, you'll see it's actually quite unreadable. It's very large, very nested. And the part that we are actually, the parts of the payload, of the rec payload that we actually care about, it's actually quite small. So by having a middleware, an express middleware here, it'll actually populate rec.body with the body portion of that request. So let's add our middleware, receiver.router.use express.json. Okay, so here we're using Express's built-in Json Parser as middleware. So anytime a request comes in, it's going to run against this middleware. And if it's JSON, it's going to use this parser to populate rec.body.
Okay, so there's a comment in the chat from Matthew that says you might not want to use the async in the post function, but I think it needs to be asynchronous, right?
It doesn't necessarily need to be asynchronous, but it shouldn't cause problems for us here. I mean, in my reference application I built, I used it. So let's try again. I don't know if this is going to solve our problem, to be honest. Oh, it did. Perfect. What I ideally should have done was I should have done that before this. Let's just comment that out. Yeah, so I think what solved our problem was that the Express version that comes with Bolt.js baked in is older, and maybe it was struggling with the async or something else here. But by downloading and by npm installing the latest version, we got around that problem.
Okay.
Okay, so I can thank you, Matthew, for the jump in assist. I appreciate that. Where did my mouse go? I lost it somehow. Oh, it looks like my Bluetooth decided to disconnect. That is okay. Yep, Bluetooth definitely decided to disconnect.
Oh, very sorry. This is Michael. My bad.
Oh, it's Michael. I know Michael.
The W, and I was like, Matthew.
Oh, who is this clutch Matthew jumping in? Okay. So I've started my server. Everything's running. You know, we haven't had any build errors to show that like the code we just added is wrong or incorrect. That's a good sign. So I created this endpoint. Now, this is where we need to use ngrok for those of you who are familiar with it, because right now this is running off my local host on port 3000. And obviously I cannot provide localhost :3000/github-stars to GitHub. GitHub won't know like where my localhost is. That's where ngrok comes in. It's really handy because it exposes my localhost 3000 on a URL. And in my example, it's using stevegill.ngrok.io. So I can go ahead and copy this. And I assume everyone's familiar with starting up ngrok. I don't need to cover that. But if people do want me to, I can do that too. Just let me know.
Rebecca, so you have to install the latest version of Express and then add it as a dependency in your code. Was
she getting the same error I got previously?
Yes. Or I think she was just asking. Maybe she went away for a second.
Oh, okay, yeah. Yeah. I'm pretty sure that was the problem, but now's not the time to go and verify that. So I'm going to go to the payload URL. So I'm going to paste my ngrok, and then I'm going to add my new route, which was github-stars. Pretty simple. I'm going to go ahead and click add webhook. Okay, it looks like it's been added, and I'm going to start it. And I can actually go into this webhook and see the deliveries. And if it's a check mark, that's a really good sign. I can go back to my code. Ooh, rec.body undefined. Oh, I didn't save it. That's fine.
ngrok isn't connected to your app, right?
ngrok is connected to my app.
Oh, you already did that. Okay.
Yeah, so just to show that, I'll just stop this and start it again. I ran this ngrok HTTP command with the 3000 port right here. Hold on, I should zoom in a bit. The 3000 port, and I'm obviously including a host name because I have one that we'll pay for. So I get the same ngrok URL every time, which makes it a little easier for testing. But for you all, I would imagine you're on the free plan, so it's going to be like a random ngrok URL. I'm going to go ahead and start it, so it's connected. And then, so I sent this payload, and the green check mark means it's good. It means not only did it send the payload, I also responded with a 200. So during the debugging, I kind of glossed over that fact, but you'll see at the end of my callback here for my endpoint, I send a 200 status code saying, it's okay, I got it. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with HTTP status codes, there's a handful of them that are widely used, and it's all standardized. Like you might be familiar with the 404 code, not found, or the 500 code, which is like internal error, server error. So right away, I just sent A-OK because GitHub wants to know that you received the payload and things were good. So that's why I sent the 200. You can see my rec.body was undefined. I think that's because I didn't save and relaunch the app. So I'm going to do that because I want to show you what rec.body looks like. And I can go ahead and star and unstar again, or I can just click on a payload that was sent and click redeliver. So that's an easy way to do it too. So go back to Bolt, go back to my application, and you can see here's my rec.body. And this is the payload GitHub sent me. It's got a sender, so information about me, my GitHub username. It's got information about the repository. So I believe this is all under a repository key. Yep. It's got an action. So in this scenario, I created a star, but if I unstarred, it would be deleted, I believe, or delete. And you can also see this payload on GitHub if you don't want to look at it in your console. This payload that I just redelivered, if I expand it, you can see here it is, action start at repository. It's got a lot of useful information in here. Who owns the repo? What's the repo URL? What's the star count? Things like that. Those are some of the fields we're going to be using today, but there's a lot of very useful information in here. So, if you wanted to build an app that, makes your GitHub workflow stronger by bringing in some of that information into Slack, GitHub definitely provides a lot of great information via webhooks or through their API. Okay, so we've received it. We're good there. So I guess the next step is let's actually parse this rec.body. Let's go through it, pull out the information that's relevant to us, and then we'll post that back into Slack. Sounds good? Okay, so for our example, I'm going to go ahead and comment this console log out because we don't need to see the payload every time. But for our example, we're going to pull out a few different fields from that rec.body. So I'm going to pull out from rec.body. I'm going to pull out action. I'm going to pull out the repository key. Now I'm going to pull out the sender key. So, 3 main keys. There's a lot of good information in there. And for our example here, I want to support star when a repo gets starred, but I also want to report when a repo gets when the star gets removed. So we saw the payload for when a repo is starred is created. Now, if I go up here and I actually unstar this, we should see another payload. I think I should be able to refresh that. There we go. Here's another payload. So this is the unstar payload. And one key difference is the action is deleted instead of created. So using that, we can hopefully build the ability for this function to post either it's been deleted, starred or unstarred. And That action attribute, that action key, is kind of our way to differentiate between the two different types of actions. So, let's call that a verb. It's our verb in this scenario. It's either going to be created or deleted. And we're going to see if it equals deleted. So you can see in here, I'm kind of doing an inline if statement. So if action equals deleted, it's called a ternary actually in JavaScript here. I'm going to call my verb unstarred. And if it wasn't deleted, then I think it's pretty safe to assume it was created was the action. So I'm going to go ahead and default that to starred. Now we know, we're going to be setting our verb. It's either going to be starred or unstarred, depending on what action is. And then now let's actually create the text we want to send to Slack. I'm going to create a variable called text. I'm going to use template strings here in JavaScript. That way I can just insert variables right into my string. I'm going to get my login, the information of who the sender was. So who did the starring? That's what sender.login will provide. And once again, we can look at the payload. We can go look at the sender field. There's login. You can see it's going to say Stephen Gill. So sender.login, it's a good opportunity to use our verb. So it'll be like just starred or unstarred. And this is where we probably want the repo name, maybe a link to the repo. We'll just start with the repo name. Repository. So now we know which repo it was that got the logging, that got the starring or unstarring. And then from there, we probably want to provide the star count. Bringing the star count to, I believe it's repository dot, one second, I think it's Stargazer, yeah.
I like the name.
GitHub Stargazer count. Okay.
Stargazers, plural.
Oh, Stargazers. Thank you. Oh, okay, we got two of those. Okay, I think we're good on the text. We'll have to see how that looks at the end. And now we need to call, since we're not in a regular Bolt listener, we don't have access to the client argument that usually comes with it, but we do still have access to a client through app. So that's our built-in web client that comes with Bolt, and we can use that to access our APIs. And in our example, we're going to use the chat post message API. So app.client.chat, one second, .chat.postmessage. So that's the API that we're using. And I know Fifi mentioned Axios earlier. Technically, you could use Axios for this as well, which is kind of sweet. But in our example, we want to use the built-in features because they give you a little bit more out of the box. For instance, we know what the API method name is just through the library here. With Axios, you would have to provide that API method name. And the post message takes in a few arguments here. So it needs the token, which we obviously already have, process.and.slackbot token, perfect. It's going to need a channel. So what channel we want to post to, which we haven't figured out yet. We'll go do that in a second. And then what we want to send. And in our example, we want to send our text. So let's quickly go figure out what channel we want to be in. So I'm going to go to my sample workspace here. I'm going to go ahead and create a channel. Let's call it Bitcamp. And then generally, when we create a channel, we also need to invite our bot to that channel, our app to that channel. So we know in my scenario, I called my app Bitcamp-week 4. So I'm just going to go ahead and invite Bitcamp week 4, and now they've been added. So because we invited them, they have permissions to write to the channel. There is a different scope we could use to give our app the ability to write to any public channels. But in our example, I expect you all to add the app to the channel that you want to write to. So I called it Bitcamp. Let's go back to our code. Write Bitcamp. And I think that's all we need for now. Let's give it a shot. Run our application again. Let's trigger that route by going to our repo and starring it. And let's go to Slack. Stephen Gill just started the Bitcamp week 4 repository, bringing the star count to 1. Great, that worked. Let's try unstarring. Go back to Slack. Just unstarred the Bitcamp week 4 repository, bring the count to 0. So that worked exactly as we expected. Yay, no demo fail.
Thankfully.
Thankfully. So just to summarize what we just covered here, we created a custom route in the server that Bolt.js already creates for you. So we created a custom route on it. That's not functionality that's built into our default HTTP receiver. So for that functionality, to use that functionality right now, you need to actually use the Express receiver, which is why we defined a custom receiver on line 8 based off of Express receiver, which ships with Bolt. It's available. And then using that and the router property on the receiver, we were able to create a route that had a callback associated to it. And then in that callback, after we created a webhook on GitHub, that webhook came to our endpoint. We parsed through the data, and then we provided we pulled out the useful information, and we provided that in a Slack channel where we can keep track of now how much traction our repository is getting, how many stars it's getting in public. Maybe that's something, maybe you're in charge of the React community and you love seeing those stars coming in, and maybe it's a metric that you keep track of. And being able to input that value right into Slack is maybe like a good hurrah moment for the team. Maybe you only post every 10th star, so doesn't spam you if you're getting a lot of stars. But just shows you the power of pulling in events from GitHub via webhooks. So we can use any of the events from GitHub. We could pull them in, and we could then pull out the relevant information and post it. So that's it for that example. And then I do have one more example I wanted to go over. This one's a little different. This one, we're less concerned with Express. We're going to instead use Axios. And we're going to be working with the GitHub API. And Fifi, have you all covered App Home at all?
No, this is the first time we're going to be covering that.
Perfect. So I can cover App Home for you as well. Okay. So just to set the context, what we want to do for this next example is we have a repository on GitHub. It has who knows how many issues. Well, I'm kind of lazy. I don't like to go to GitHub and look at my issue tracker all the time. I hang out in Slack all the time. Why can't I just see all my issues in Slack? So what we want to do is we want to actually pull the list of all of the issues I have on my repository. And to do that, we're going to need the URL for my repository. And using the API from GitHub to pull it. And once I have all of those issues, I want to display them somewhere. Now, it doesn't make sense for me to display them all in a message like I just did. Like, I wouldn't run that command one time and it would just dump all my messages, all my issues here, and then forever, like as other comments come here, it would get buried. So really, I need like a central place I can go to consistently and see all my issues. Luckily, Slack has this surface area called App Home. So all your apps, they actually have like a home page essentially. You can go to it, and when you click your app under apps, you'll see there's a home tab. And this is actually a great spot for us to list all our issues. And as new issues come in, every time you come back to your app home, it's going to run our app home listener. So essentially, it would go back to GitHub, pull all the issues again, making sure that it's always relevant. It always stays consistent with what's actually available on GitHub. So if you close an issue on GitHub and you come back to your app home, you would expect that issue not to be there anymore. So that the way we're going to design this, that is true. Okay, enough context. But to start, let's go to our app config. And we actually have to go under event subscriptions. So we need to subscribe to a new event. So if you're coming here for the first time, this will be disabled. First, you need to enable events. And then you need to provide a request URL. Now, if you're familiar with Bolt, which I assume many of you are, Bolt has that one URL that it uses for all events, all incoming events. It's like, hey, Slack, any event that comes, just send it here, and I will handle Bolt, the application, will handle sorting out which listener it needs to go to. That's Bolt's job. You just send everything to this one endpoint that I created. Great, that's easy. For us, it's our ngrok URL /slack/events. Pretty straightforward. Hopefully that's nothing new. And then we need to subscribe to an event. So it's quite simple. We're actually going to be subscribing to the app home opened event. So you can click add bot user event, search for app home open. You can see I've already added it. It doesn't require any new scopes, which is great. It means we don't actually have to reinstall our app. Generally, if you add new scopes or new permissions, you need to go through the reinstall flow. But for this event, we do not. Click Save Changes. And then we also want to go and enable App Home. It isn't enabled by default for all apps. If you want it, you actually have to opt in. So you go to this App Home in the sidebar here. And it talks about like what App Home does, and it leads you to some more documentation. But for our example, just scroll down to Show Tabs, and you'll see a Home tab section, and make sure it's on. It was off for me, so I turned it on already, but you all will want to turn it on. Great, I think we're done with app config. Go back to our code. Okay, so I don't know if you've done event. I imagine you have if this is week 4, but in Bolt, there's a few different listener types. And in our example, we're going to use the event listener because we're listening for it specifically an event. And usually with all Bolt's listeners, they follow a similar pattern. The first item is what we're matching against. And the second item is the callback that we want to run if the match is successful. Right? It's pretty, I haven't filled it out yet, but so in our example, what are we matching against? What's the event name? And we just added the event, so I think we know what the event name is. It's app, home, opened. And then in our callback, there's a few different values that Bolt exposes here that are available to us. But in our example today, the only things we need are our event. So that's going to be the payload that Slack sends us has an event property on it. So we're going to pretty much that event property contains everything we need for our use case. There are other properties as well on that payload. And if we wanted to see the entire payload, we could actually look at the body event, the body argument here in our callback. And that includes the event payload as well. But for our scenario, like we're just going to use the event shorthand. And the other thing we want is the client. So that is if we want to make any API calls to Slack, the client is what we need to access any of the Slack API methods. And this client is a little different than this client that we used above. This client, for instance, already is going to have the token property bound to it automatically. Because this is inside of the context of a listener, a both listener, there's a few extra little bits we can do to it. This one, it's top level. It's still using the web client package under the hood that we exposed, the Slack web API client. But at this stage, we don't know what the token is for app. I mean, people might want to use this for different use cases as well. So we don't bind token automatically, which is why you have to expose it here. Anyways, sorry for rambling. Okay, so now is actually our time to use Axios. So let's stop our app. Let's npm install Axios. Great, I got it. I can go to the top. I can go const Axios equals require Axios. Okay, I think we're good there. And then I'm going to scroll back down and we want to use the axios.get command. And sorry, just going to go back to my reference here and make sure I don't make any mistakes. So this takes in, as a first argument, it takes in the URL of where you want to make a GET request. So we're going to hit this URL. We're going to be like, hey, send me whatever you want to send me. Send me a payload. And then as we get that payload, if there's usually two ways to approach it. You can have a callback that gets run, or we can use await and assign it directly to a variable. Before we get there, what is our URL? So I'm just going to create a variable for it, GitHub URL. I go back to my repo here. You can see this is my URL, but this is my HTTP URL. For this example, we're actually going to be using GitHub's API to do a GET request. So the URL is a little different. So instead of HTTP, instead of just using the regular HTTP URL, we're going to use the API URL. So it's api.github.com. And then usually it's, I think, repos, with an S, yep. Thank you. And then the repo name. So it's under my username, and the repo name is GitBitCamp week 4. Okay, now we have the GitHub URL. And in our example, we want to grab the issues in particular, so we can actually go issues here as well. And then now in our axios.get, I can just say GitHub URL. You should know what to get. And I need to assign this to a variable or call a callback. I kind of feel like using a variable. And I know maybe just for the purpose of the demo, I'll actually show what the response is. Const data equals await axios.get. So the await keyword here will force execution to stop. So we won't execute any code below until axios.get gets back to us. We're going to get the data. This is probably a good point to stop and show a little console log of the data. App.
You just need the on the end of that, you need like the parentheses and semicolon.
Yes. I'm missing that, I think. Yes, no, is that me? What did I miss? I'm definitely missing something. 1 second. That looks good. App.event, but okay, Okay, I think I just didn't save it. I think it was a weird save state. I didn't change anything there. So anyways, it's working now. So let's trigger the app home opened event, and we should see this console log. Go here. Let's click on Bitcamp week 4. Ignore what's in there right now. I apologize for that, but that's from my previous demo test. That is an unexpected error. Let me just restart this one more time. Verification signature Slack request signing failed. That's strange. I don't think our signing secret is wrong. Let me double check. Maybe we accidentally reset it. I think it's right. And change signing secret up here. Maybe it's because we're not doing anything in the app home open event yet. It's a little mad at us. But that's a strange error.
You don't need an ACK for this either, right?
Sorry?
You don't need to acknowledge this event.
Yeah, no, good question. With app.event, it's a little special in Bolt. Like app.action and app.option and app.shortcut, like any of the other listeners, you do have to acknowledge within 3 seconds. App.event, because there's nothing you could potentially provide in the acknowledgement, we automatically do that for you. So it's unique in that sense. So there's no ACK. App.event will auto ACK for you. With something like an action, like a button click or something, you can actually use ACK to do some verification. Like a form is submitted, you could use ACK and be like, actually the inputs are wrong. And you would actually provide that during ACK. And then the Slack would, show appropriate error. That isn't possible with event. It's not a concept that really exists. So with acknowledgement not taking any value, it made sense for Bolt to auto do it for you. Okay, so I think the error might be because I'm not doing anything, and it's potentially pointing at an old app home. Something weird is going on. So I say we move forward for now. One thing I did want to show this data, but maybe we'll come back to that. But one thing I wanted to show is that in this data, there's actually a data property I wanted to pull out. And specifically, there's a issues property on that data. So we'll go back and actually look at the full data after. But in this example, the payload that we get from GitHub, from this api.github.com, repo, Stephen Gill, Bitcamp week 4 issues, the payload we get, it has a data key, and it has an issues key buried within that, and that's what we're pulling. So we were pulling all the issues out. And then what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to publish that on our app home. So to publish to app home, you actually have to use another API method. In this case, it's client.views.publish. And some of the values we're going to provide. So we need to provide a user ID, which we can get from the event payload. And we need to provide a view. So you can learn more about views on the API website, but essentially it's using this concept called BlockKit in Slack platform. Have you guys covered BlockKit at all?
Yep, we covered it in week 2.
Okay, perfect. So we're going to use BlockKit. So we have to provide a type. In our case, it's home. And then we're going to provide some blocks. It takes an array. and it's an array of objects. And we're going to provide a type in here. Oh, I'll start the next line. My indentation is crazy all over the place here. So it's, we're going to provide a header type, which is one of the options in BlockKit. So this will be like the header of our app home. And then it takes in a text object, which will have a type as well associated to it. And in our example, it's plain text. And then some text that goes with it. It'll be open issues. I think that should be good for now. In general, we will want to add, obviously we want to add our issues that are coming in right here. But we need to format these issues into BlockKit format, and then we can append them. But for now, I just want to save this and try running it. See if we can figure out what's going on with that error. Yeah, it doesn't seem to be running.
No, I think it changed, right?
No, it's the same error.
Oh, okay.
That's a very interesting error. What could be going on? Give me 1 second. I could have like another process running. No, I don't think that would be it. Give me 1 second. I'm just going to quickly, because we're pretty much caught up to my reference app, so I'm just going to run that for a second to see if it's having the same problem. Oh. Totally doing stuff off screen. Here, I'll bring the screen in just to show it. So this one's running. Go back to our app. Okay, so I'm running my reference app right now just to double check. And we go back to the app. Let's see. Okay, so we're not having the problem here. It's interesting. I'm not exactly sure why we're having that problem because the signing secret and the bot token are identical as far as I can tell. 9781. 9781. Yeah, I think it's the same. I mean, one thing I could think of is maybe I need to reinstall the app. Maybe we'll just do that just to be safe. Shouldn't have to, but I don't imagine you're all running into this issue. I have a feeling it's because I'm reusing the signing secret and the token. It shouldn't cause that problem, but I think something is going on here with the fact that we already had an app home. Yeah, it doesn't want to work here right now. That's okay. We don't need to lull on this. We can actually just, luckily we're at the end anyway, so we can move into the final step of parsing. Cut that. It's already here, so we might as well just cover it now. But okay, so we're at the point now where we're in our app home. We're already getting our issues using Axios. We've already confirmed that. We're pulling out issues in particular. Now, I mentioned that we need to format the issues into a block. So we're actually creating this new variable called issue blocks. And what it does is it does issues.map. And for those of you who aren't familiar, map is a built-in JavaScript function that runs on arrays. And on every single item in that array, it's going to run the following function. So issues.maps, it's getting the full list of issues. It's going to grab the specific issue, so one issue at a time in this issues array. And we're going to build a little block right here. It's going to have a type of section. It's going to have some text. The type of the text is going to be marked down. And in the text field, we're going to have, from the issue, we're going to have the URL. And if you're familiar with Markdown, you'll be like, this isn't Markdown. This is actually like Slack's way of doing, I actually think it might be standard Markdown in some flavors, but Slack doesn't support standard Markdown links the way you would expect. Usually, it's something like that. That's how we do Markdown links in general. But for Slack, you need to use these keys right here. And the first parameter is the URL we want to have, and the second parameter is the text. So we're taking the title of the issue and we're just making it a link. And then we can say open by, and we do the exact same thing with who did the opening. So we take from the issue, the payload, the user login information as the text, and then the URL that's associated to the user. So that should be their profile page. So what this will do is run through every single issue in our payload. It'll assign it. So this issues block will become an array of these objects right here. So however many issues there are, that's how many objects are going to be in this issues block. And then we come down to our publish. And inside of blocks here, we're going to add our entire new issue blocks array. So it's going to add all those objects in line as blocks. So we can save that, go ahead and run it, go back to our application. Yeah, and when you go to app home, this is what you should see. You see it's linking to the issue and it's saying who did it. We go back to the repo, we can actually, create a new issue. What up? Submit it. Okay, and now that that's open, our app is running. We don't have to do anything there. We can go back to our app home, and we want to re-trigger our app home. So you can go to the messages tab and come back, or go to somewhere else in Slack. But there it is, live issue. I can click it. Take me right there. And hopefully this inspires you, because this is obviously a very basic example. Next step you could do is maybe have the ability to pull the labels from GitHub and actually add labels to these issues. Just as one example of how you can continue to grow this application from something that's very simple and basic to something that's actually interactive and takes user feedback and then interacts with the GitHub API to maybe push those labels back. But that's all a little bit more advanced than today's session. So with that, I think we're done our code examples.
Yeah, we are.
Yay.
Thank you everybody for coming. I hope this really helped you guys understand what webhooks are useful for, as well as kind of familiarizing you with Axios and Express. After this week, you guys should be starting to brainstorm your ideas for your own personal projects that will be complete in the next 2 weeks. So please, please, please look into webhooks and other tools that you can use to integrate into your Slack apps and make them a little bit more creative and fun. Thank you guys for coming.
Yeah, thank you for watching. All right, bye everybody.